Welcome to OOTO, the Out of the Office Investigation. I'm Sally. Tonight, we're opening a case file that's, well, it's a case file on humanity itself.
And I'm Jackie. That's right, Sally. Our investigation is targeting two fundamentally opposing dossiers on our future. You could think of one as a technical manual, something that views our biology as just programmable hardware, ripe for an upgrade. The other is more like a sacred text, treating our DNA as a sovereign, unchangeable blueprint.
Exactly. Our chain of evidence is going to start in these sterile, clean rooms where data first gets encoded into DNA. From there, we'll follow a trail all the way back through the pretty dark archives of eugenics before we jump to the absolute bleeding edge of genetic engineering and some really fascinating, though fringe, reports on quantum biology.
Sally, we are standing at a critical junction here. The choice isn't just about what tech we use. It's about the very definition of what it means to be human. The evidence we're about to examine will determine which one of these futures is already being built as we speak. So let's look at the framework for tonight's investigation.
All right, our investigation is going to proceed in 5 distinct phases. First up, we've got to establish the motive, right? Why this mechanistic approach? We'll do that by understanding the sheer computational power of DNA, why it's even viewed as nature's hard drive. Then, we're going to trace the ideology. Phase 2, the architecture of control. Well, that's where we'll expose the historical precedent for this deep desire to master our own biology. But every good investigation needs a counter-theory. So Phase 3 explores DNA as a quantum antenna, a receiver, not just a storage device. And finally, we'll see how these two big narratives collide in today's technology, forcing a choice in our final phase: sovereignty or singularity.
Okay, so Phase 1 of our investigation: nature's hard drive. Before we can even begin to understand the ambition to rewrite our genetic code, Jackie, we have to first appreciate why the code itself is considered such a massive prize. From a purely mechanistic, a purely computational viewpoint, DNA isn't just a part of life. It is, quite literally, the most advanced high-density information storage medium known to science. This idea is the foundation of the entire mechanistic vision.
Now let's try to quantify this asset. You see this number, 455 exabytes. This is what has the entire tech world so captivated. According to the foundational 2012 study by Church and his team published in Science, and they're specific, in Section 3, Paragraph 2, this is the theoretical storage capacity of a single gram of DNA. Jackie, to put this in perspective for everyone, that's less than the weight of a paperclip. And Nietzsche's hard drive points out on page 7 that the entire digital output of humanity for 1 year, we're talking all our emails, videos, financial records, could be stored in a device the size of a sugar cube. This isn't just an incremental improvement over silicon, this is a complete paradigm shift.
And that paradigm shift is really being driven by necessity, Sally. The source, Nature's hard drive, outlines what it calls the silicon supply gap on page 12. Think about it. Our current data centers are absolutely voracious. They eat up massive amounts of land, huge amounts of energy just for cooling, and they rely on manufacturing processes that create some pretty significant toxic byproducts. And magnetic media, it degrades within a few decades. We are physically and economically hitting a wall when it comes to sustaining our data growth with the tech we have now. So in this context, biology isn't just some cool alternative, it's being presented as the only viable long-term solution. It's stable, unbelievably dense, and requires almost no energy to maintain once it's encoded. And this slide just visualizes that technical gap perfectly. Over on the left, you have silicon's binary logic, this flat, two-dimensional world of just zeros and ones. It's kind of like a book with only 2 letters in its alphabet. But on the right, you have life's operating system. And as the source material explains, by using a base force system, A, T, G, and C, DNA gets this exponential leap in information density. It's not just a longer book, it's a whole library, stored volumetrically in 3 dimensions. And its durability? It's staggering. The fact that scientists could sequence the full genome of a 700,000-year-old horse proves that this data is, for all practical purposes, geologically stable. It's an archive literally built to survive ice ages.
So the process itself of going from a digital file to an actual physical molecule has been pretty much standardized. We're looking at a 4-step pipeline here. First, an algorithm translates the binary into the base 4 genetic code. Then, chemical synthesizers actually build the physical DNA strands. After that, they're dehydrated and archived, a lot of times in these tiny silica beads, creating the ultimate cold storage. No power needed at all. And to read it back, a standard DNA sequencer does the job. Now, the synthesis speed is a bit of a bottleneck right now, but the principle is proven. This really establishes the how. So now, our investigation has to turn to the why. and the ideology of control that this incredibly powerful technology serves.
And that brings us right to phase 2 of our investigation.
The architecture of control. As you've laid out so clearly, the view of DNA as a superior machine is really compelling, but our research shows this perspective isn't just a neutral scientific observation. It's actually the technological endpoint of a very old and frankly very dark impulse, the desire to classify, to rank, and ultimately to control the human species itself. The ambition to write code into our genes is the direct inheritor of an ideology that has shaped human history for centuries.
That's exactly right, Jackie. This timeline really lays out the ideological chain of custody. It all starts back in 1735 with Carl Linnaeus. In his famous Systema Naturae, as noted in Eugenics: A Secular Religion on page 21, he wasn't just classifying plants. He applied that same taxonomy to humans, assigning permanent psychological traits to different races, and in doing so, created the first scientific justification for a hierarchy. Then, a century later, Samuel George Morton weaponized this with craniometry, using skull volume to make a data-driven argument for racial intelligence hierarchies. And then, Darwin's own cousin, Francis Galton, gives the whole project a name, eugenics, formalizing the goal of improving human stock. These aren't just random events. They are the sequential building blocks of an ideology that now finds its ultimate expression in pre-implantation genetic testing.
And this is the modern frontier of that exact ideology, PGTP. In some elite IVF clinics, this technology is being used right now to generate what the source genetic design explicitly calls a scorecard for human embryos. This isn't just about screening for single-gene disorders like cystic fibrosis anymore. Oh no, we are talking about analyzing thousands of genetic markers to produce a probabilistic score for really complex traits, intelligence, height, even personality predispositions. As detailed in The Architecture of Biological Inequality on page 55, this allows parents to select an embryo based on a ranked list of desirable outcomes. The process, as our investigation concludes, is functionally a new, technologically sophisticated, and highly commercialized form of eugenics.
You know, the source, genetic design, the new reality, just crystallizes this whole ethical crisis with a single, chilling phrase: the ungodly sorting. It frames this selection process not as a medical choice, but as a moment of judgment where a life's potential is weighed and found worthy or unworthy based entirely on a digital score. According to the source Eugenics: A Secular Religion, this represents a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves. Human value stops being inherent and sacred. It becomes conditional, something assigned and measured. Life becomes a product to be quality controlled.
You're listening to OOTO, the Out of the Office Investigation, with research by El Campesino.
But what's fascinating is that our investigation found this mechanistic view is being seriously challenged by a really radical counter-narrative. And this brings us to phase 3, DNA as a quantum antenna. What if the genetic code isn't just a static hard drive to be read and written to? What if it's a dynamic, living receiver, constantly in a subtle communication with the universe around it? This is what we're calling the sovereign vision.
And this slide right here, this poses the central question that really divides the two visions of humanity we're investigating. Is DNA only a hard drive, just a passive library of our ancestral data? Or is it also a receiver? You see, the standard materialist model of biology, which is the foundation for all the technologies we've talked about so far, it views the body as a biochemical machine that has to be physically altered. But as sources like Mind, Matter, and Manifesting Life propose, starting around page 87, there's this emerging perspective that suggests our biology is profoundly interactive, that it responds to forces and information that mainstream science is frankly only just beginning to acknowledge.
The theoretical framework for this idea is often called wave genetics. It was pioneered by researchers like the, controversial Russian biophysicist Peter Gurayev. This theory suggests that the 98% of our DNA that's often just dismissed as junk DNA is anything but. According to this model, our DNA actually functions like a biological antenna. It suggests the helical structure of the molecule itself is uniquely suited to receive and transduce information from electromagnetic fields and maybe even more subtle energy fields. So in this view, our DNA isn't just executing some pre-written program. It's in a constant dialogue with this environment, translating energetic frequencies into real-time biological instructions. And that implies a level of biological plasticity and interactivity that's way beyond the central dogma of genetics.
Exactly, Sally. And if that theory holds any water, then our modern world presents a pretty significant problem. The source Mind, Matter, and Manifesting Life describes our environment on page 112 as a chaotic electromagnetic soup. We are just saturated in it. The constant, high-frequency, incoherent signals from Wi-Fi, 5G networks, satellite transmissions, and all the general electrical noise of a city, it creates this pervasive static. The hypothesis of wave genetics is that this electromagnetic smog might be drowning out the subtle, coherent, natural frequencies our DNA actually evolved to receive. And this interference, the theory suggests, isn't just noise. It could be actively suppressing a sovereign human ability, the potential to consciously influence our own biology through focused intent and by harmonizing with these natural signals.
And this right here is where our investigation finds the two paths colliding head-on. This is phase 4, rewriting the human OS. Because you see, Jackie, the technological path has zero interest in harmonizing with some subtle signal or clearing up the static. Its solution is to seize control of the hardware. It aims to bypass the antenna completely and rewrite the operating system at the root level. In this vision, if DNA is code, then humanity is simply the next great platform to be programmed.
The first tool in this big rewrite is mRNA technology. As the blueprint of life details, this really represents a fundamental shift in medical philosophy. It's not a drug in the traditional sense, and it's not a vaccine that introduces a weakened pathogen. It is, for all intents and purposes, a biological software update. The mRNA acts as an application programming interface, an API, for the human cell. It delivers a set of instructions directly to the ribosomes, basically turning our own cellular machinery into an on-demand manufacturing platform. It's really the first step in treating the body not as a system to be healed, but as a platform to be programmed.
And then we have CRISPR-Cas9, the so-called molecular scissors. Look, if mRNA is like delivering a temporary software patch, CRISPR is like having root access to the hard drive's source code. As Synthego's guide explains it, this technology is a repurposed bacterial defense system. It uses a guide RNA molecule to hunt down a precise sequence in our 3 billion-letter genome and make a surgical cut. From there, we can delete a gene or even insert a new synthetic sequence. This moves us way beyond delivering temporary instructions and straight into the realm of permanent, heritable editing of the human OS.
And as the case of Lulu and Nana proved, this is no longer just a theory. Back in 2018, the Chinese scientist He Jiankui ignored all kinds of international ethical protocols and created the world's first gene-edited babies. He used CRISPR to edit the CCR5 gene in human embryos, and his intent was to grant them immunity to HIV. As the source Genetic Design, the New Reality states on page 78, this single act proved that germline editing, making heritable changes that will be passed down through all subsequent generations, is now a demonstrated reality. A 2019 article in the Canadian Medical Association Journal put it very bluntly: Pandora's box is now irrevocably open.
And this slide, which draws from the source Eugenics, a Secular Religion, it brings the core conflict of our entire investigation into its sharpest possible focus. It really presents the technological and the theological as two competing faces. On one side, you've got the view of life as a sacred creation. In this framework, our origin is divine, our value is inherent and absolute, and our DNA is the Creator's blueprint. Even suffering has a purpose, a path to spiritual growth.
And on the other side, Jackie, you have the eugenic or manufactured view. Here, life is a product, not a creation. Its value isn't inherent, it's conditional, based on measurable traits and scores. DNA is just programmable code. And suffering isn't a path to growth, it's a glitch in the system. It's a bug to be deleted from the code. I mean, these are two completely irreconcilable worldviews.
Which brings us to the final phase of our investigation: sovereignty or singularity. All the evidence we've examined, the power of DNA as data, the ideology of control, the incredible potential of quantum biology, and the raw power of gene editing tools, it all converges on this one final crossroads. The choice is no longer abstract. It's a very practical decision about our evolutionary future. Are we going to be sovereign creators, or are we going to be manufactured products?
You're listening to OOTO, the Out-of-the-Office Investigation, with research by L. Campesino. This table, adapted from Mind, Matter, and Manifesting Life, it just lays out the two divergent paths with stark clarity. The sovereign path, that's an inward journey. It's about learning to harmonize our own consciousness with our DNA, using focused intent and spiritual discipline. It sees life as a sacred blueprint that we have to learn to steward. It's a path of personal responsibility for our own evolution.
The manufactured path, on the other hand, is a path of outsourcing. It's about delegating our evolution to external systems, to corporate labs, genetic designers, and ultimately to artificial intelligence. It views life as a programmable code that needs to be optimized for efficiency and performance.
It seeks a godlike outcome not through inner discipline but through brute technological force, and it all culminates in what its proponents call the eugenic singularity. And its ultimate goal is immortality, but a very specific kind. As the source Technotheology outlines, in this worldview, death is not a sacred or spiritual transition. It is framed as a failure of the hardware, a technical glitch in our biological programming that can, and therefore should, be solved.
But the critics, drawing from that same mind, matter, and manifesting life source, they argue that this promised technological heaven is actually a deception. And this quote really encapsulates their warning. The singularity, they argue, replaces the infinite unknown potential of the human soul with the finite, programmable, and therefore controllable logic of an AI godhead. It offers an imitation of divinity, but the price of admission is total subjugation. You might achieve a form of immortality, but you do it by becoming a subject of a new technological god, a god whose code can be patched, updated, and most importantly, controlled.
And so our investigation concludes right where it began, with a fundamental question of value. This is the philosophical core that has animated this entire conflict, from Linnaeus classifying humans in the 18th century all the way to the genetic designers of the 21st.
Is our value inherent, something sacred, sovereign, and intrinsic to our being from the moment we're born? Or is it something to be assigned, to be measured, scored, and ultimately defined by an external system? Whether that system is based on the size of your skull, an IQ test, or a polygenic risk score, this is the choice we now face.
The investigation continues. Thank you for joining us on OOTO, the Out of the Office investigation.